Days before the Air India 171 crash investigation report, the preliminary report has been submitted to the government and the relevant authorities. Days before this report is to be made public, leaked media reports of the investigation or purportedly of the investigation have created unrest and disquiet within the pilot community. Those we've been speaking to say that the leaked media reports seem to be pointing a finger at Captain Sumeet and Captain Clive, who were in command of the ill-fated aircraft that crashed 32 seconds after takeoff from Ahmedabad as it was headed towards London. The big question is, why is there speculation on this report and its findings before it has been placed officially in the public domain before the people of India and the larger aviation community? Is there an attempt to deflect from the tough questions, some might wonder, as at least the narratives that have emerged in the media so far are seeking, some say, to point a finger at the pilots. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, we look at what we know so far. Do we know anything at all that is verified and verifiable about what led to the Air India crash? The devastation for the families who were left behind of the passengers and the crew and the pilots on board continues, even as, unfortunately, the crash fades from the headlines. But in pilot forums and in the pilot community, there is unrest and disquiet. This is because there have been some leaked reports, we have no way of corroborating these independently, that pilots and their larger communities say is focusing on the wrong set of issues and asking the wrong set of questions. Health warning, whatever has emerged in the public domain so far, is not the official publicly released report. That still has to be done. It could be done later this week or at a later date, but the preliminary investigation report has been handed over to the government. To talk about why this leaked report and some of the leaks that have come have caused disquiet in the pilot community, I want to introduce our two very distinguished guests on the program. I'm joined by Captain Rakesh Rai. He has been somebody who has commanded the Dreamliner, the 787 aircraft that is in focus at this moment. And also joining me is Captain Sam Thomas. Captain Sam Thomas is, of course, the president of the Airline Pilots Association of India, ALPA, and it's good to see both of you. Captain Thomas, I'll start with you. You know, there have been reports, one of them came in the Financial Express, and I'll just show you the headline of that report, that is focused on fuel switches, right? That is focused on fuel switches, and it is spoken on whether the fuel switches were possibly cut off before they were run again. Now, I've been speaking to a number of people in the aviation community, a number of pilots, and they say that they're really surprised by this particular focus because one, sources are telling us that photographs from the crash site when they were recovered showed that the fuel control switches were in run position, not in cutoff position. Secondly, these sources, Captain Thomas, are saying that had there been a dual engine failure, had both engines flamed out, as is widely now suspected, the fuel switches would indeed need to be cut off and then run again. And this would have been because, and again, pardon me if I'm getting anything technically wrong, but this would have been because it would have needed to auto set the engine because both engines have flamed out. So if indeed Captain Sumeet did cut off the engines to cut off the fuel switches to run them again, it would have been the correct procedure. We do not know if this has happened, but what a lot of pilots and the larger community is asking is, why is the focus on the fuel switches and not on the loss of thrust? Is this a misplaced focus? Now, again, these are leaked reports. We do not know what the final report will say. We do not know what the official report will say. But are you concerned at some of these leaks, Captain Thomas?
Good evening, ma'am. First of all, great job, despite being out of London to carry out the pursuit of truth. And as we had spoken in our previous interaction, this is our fear. A leaked narrative is always going to be done in a phased manner wherein now in India, at least 50% of the public believe that yes, there has been a problem with the pilot's actions. Now, like you very rightly said, if it were to be a technical problem with dual engine failure, and with the permission of Captain Rai, I'd like to tell that the actions, as you said, are perfectly correct. You put the fuel cutoff switches to cut off and then to run. Now, what we were saying is that keep it transparent so that these kind of speculations do not come out. Now, I'd like to push your attention a little bit towards the MAX crash, the second MAX crash, wherein the Ethiopian authorities did not leave the custody of the DFDR and CVR, and therefore they were able to get to the bottom of the problem. Now, pardon me, we are going to use a little bit of technicalities because we are at the business end of the preliminary report. Firstly, I do not believe that a preliminary report or any kind of report has been handed over to the ministry, because it's well and nigh impossible when you haven't appointed someone in charge as a lead investigator or at least made it public, and the time being extremely short. Now, if there is some kind of preliminary report, it has to come from the NTSB's help. It has to come from that side. And our contention is, why is the Indian media so enamored by some ridiculous leaked, not confirmed report indicating that this could be the problem? What we're saying is this is setting a narrative, and this is playing the Indian media, thereby playing the Indian public. Please do not fall for that. And we will do everything in our power. And we are thankful as ALPA India for you having asked the right questions and pushing the narrative away from this falsified explanations.
Captain Thomas, thank you for your kind words. Only trying to do our job the best to the best of our ability. What I want to ask you is, you just said something. You said you do not go by this preliminary report that is reported to have been submitted because you believe that a lead investigator has not been announced. Could you explain this? I'll come back to what the media reports say, but could you explain what you mean by this?
Okay. The moment we have a crash or accident, the Air Accident Investigation Board announces a panel, which is headed by a person who is an expert in air accident investigation. His name is announced, his team is announced. That's the way they're going to go about it. And this the public should give them all kind of assistance, is what is generally published. Now, in this particular case, there has been secrecy all around. There has been a veil all around. I mean, what is the problem in telling who the lead investigator is? To date, nobody knows. That again is speculation. Now, unless the lead investigator is there, he can't assemble his team. He cannot interact with the NTSB, with Boeing, or any of the agencies that are to be interviewed during this process. So that is the reason we are saying that nobody in India today knows who the lead investigator is. Once we know that, we can go to the next step. So what we're saying is no team in time.
Let me take this to Captain Rai, who's actually flown the 787 that has now become, in a way, Captain Rai, the subject of global attention. Before I ask you to focus on these reports on the fuel switches, I do want to take your attention to something that happened on the 7th of July. A United Airline 787 from Newark was forced to make a return after a mid-air mechanical breakdown. So it takes off from, this is not Air India, guys, by the way, everybody who wants to sort of jump in and make this only about one airline. This is United. It's a 787, the same aircraft that crashed in Ahmedabad. It is forced to make a return to Newark after mid-air mechanical breakdown. I also want to juxtapose this with two very important statements that have come from a US-based aviation attorney. Her name is Mary Schiavo. She has said to the Sunday Guardian that 787 malfunctions were documented earlier. She is asking the question that we should be asking: have possible risks in the Boeing 787 actually really been addressed? And she has further said that in the past, and she cites an incident from Japan in 2019, she says that a dual engine thrust rollback could have taken place because of a software glitch, and such malfunctions have been documented earlier as well. Now, I quote this US based aviation expert, I quote the United episode because I want to juxtapose it now with what is being suggested about the fuel switches. So it seems to me perhaps that the right questions are not being asked. The pilots are no longer alive. The easiest thing after any crash is to point a finger at a man or a woman no longer alive to defend themselves. Are you concerned with some of these leaked reports and the focus on the fuel switches? Because, as I said, according to sources, photographs from the crash site show that the fuel control switches were found in run position. So even if they were cut off, possibly this was done because both engines flamed out. Captain Rai, you have flown this plane. Tell us what you say.
Namaskar, Jai Hind. Let me first elaborate on what Captain Sam Thomas had said about the foreign media. Now, this lady attorney, she is an aviation expert, but she is not technically qualified to actually make comments on whatever has happened. I think this article came out in the newspaper, maybe trying to attract clients for her profession. So I will not give much weightage to that. However, on Twitter, there have been a lot of the foreign pilots who have been pointing fingers at pilot error in this case, and one
Captain Rai, we can't hear you.
So,
Captain Rai, start again, sir. We couldn't hear you. Start again. Start again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So there have been a lot of reports by foreign pilots on this accident, and they have been pointing fingers at pilot error. And one of the pilots went to the extent of saying that, why didn't the pilot lower the nose? I would like to ask her, lower the nose at 400 feet and achieve what? Ultimately, the aircraft had to go down. So there is clearly a narrative being generated to point fingers at the pilot. But let me first make it very clear. Captain Sumeet and his co-pilot did not walk from home, come to the aircraft and said, let's play games with the fuel control switches. Even if the fuel control switch was cut off and rerun, there must have been something. There must have something gone wrong with the aeroplane. That's why they did that. It's not something to play around with. Now, let me explain what happens in a takeoff roll. After a speed which is called B1, the decision speed, the pilot flying puts both his hands on the control column. And the pilot not flying has his hands on his thighs, waiting for any eventuality in case of pilot incapacitation, he can take over the aeroplane. None of their hands are anywhere close to the fuel control switch. And fuel control switch, if somebody wants to put it off, it has a gate. It has to be a deliberate attempt to switch off the fuel control switches. Now, if somebody is saying that they may have done that, well, in case of a dual engine failure, it is a standard procedure detailed by the Boeing company. And allow me to read from the flight crew training manual. I'll read verbatim what the flight crew training manual says. Dual engine failure is a situation that demands prompt action regardless of altitude or airspeed. Accomplish memory items and establish the appropriate airspeed to immediately attempt a windmill start. There is a higher probability that a windmill start will succeed if the restart attempt is made as soon as possible or immediately after recognizing an engine failure. Now I'm skipping a few of the lines. It says cycling both fuel control switches is used during a dual engine failure to reset both EECs. Now, even if the pilots have recycled the fuel control switches because of dual engine failure, they should be appreciated for that, because that is what the Boeing manual says. They have had the presence of mind to carry out the memory items as published in the quick reference handbook. So whatever, even if they have switched off the fuel control switches and rerun, it is as per the Boeing manual. They have taken absolutely correct action. So if somebody goes and says that the fuel control switches,
Yeah. Let me just jump in there and take that to Captain Thomas, Captain Rai. You don't have the best network, but I got the operative part of what you were saying, and let me run it. Let me reiterate it. One is that it is Boeing's prescribed SOP to cut and run fuel switches, run them again, to cut them off and run them again if there is a dual engine failure. The aim of this is to reset the EEC. In simple words, basically the engine can be only reset if both engines have failed by cutting off and running these fuel switches again. The fuel switches were found in run position. If the pilots have indeed done this, as the leaked report suggests, they've actually gone by the Boeing manual, and the pilots should be appreciated for trying this even in the 20 odd seconds that they had. Captain Thomas, can I take this to you, sir? Talk a little bit about this, that, if this has happened, imagine, we say 32 seconds from takeoff to crash, but in real terms, and you've pointed this out before, it's only about 15 seconds of intervention or 20 seconds of intervention. And if indeed this attempt was made, as Captain Rai was explaining, this was going completely by the book, and the pilots had the presence of mind for doing this even in the few seconds they had, if this is true. Captain Thomas, over to you, sir.
Captain Rai has pointed out exactly what has happened. In fact, he has read out the FCTM, the Flight Crew Training Manual, and one can't get more clearer than that. And you're absolutely right. The pilots are trained, Sumeet, for sure, that he can do this in 20 seconds. There's no problem with that. He would have done it at least once in 20 seconds. And he has maintained his composure and done this action. But there is very little he can do beyond that. And if the fuel control switches are cut off and rerun again, it is as per the book. So what we are trying to tell you is that despite it being from the manual, from the training manual, you see how the calibrated leak is put out so that you get a negative image of this. And this, ma'am, is going to continue throughout. There are stages. We've been through this many a time, so we know where it's going. Eventually, they will prevail upon you to say that, hey, look, this is a great company. This needs to survive. This makes millions of jobs possible. Anyway, the crew are deceased. Let's give them something. Public memory is short. We'll blame them for a while. It'll go on, and thereafter, nobody will remember it. Everybody goes home happy. That is the narrative being played. What we are objecting to is how come the Indian media, which is so well developed here, is unable to see it, despite our warnings.
Can I ask you, before I come back to Captain Rai, you believe that you basically are saying that Boeing is too powerful for the truth to come out? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're suggesting?
I am only basing the statements of previous experience. Look at the MAX. Let's not go by hearsay or my opinion. Let's just look at the MAX investigations. When the first Lion Air MAX crashed, a very quick report came out saying that these pilots don't know how to fly it. Incidentally, one was an Indian. When the second crash happened, luckily, the Ethiopians were far more proactive, and they took a sort of frontal role and made sure that the truth came out. That is the way that the world learned that actually it was not a pilot problem. It was a grave mistake in the design of the 737 MAX. Now, let's again base the American versions of this. A lot of whistleblowers are coming and saying that not everything is right with the 787. Be that as it may, look at the number. When there is a focus, look at the number of 787s that have had technical issues in the last 45 days or so.
Yeah.
So this is what we are trying to point out. Be fair, be transparent, doesn't matter. Even if it's your fault, own up, and then we can start the slate new. clean slate, and we go forward, but don't cover up, which is not just limited to Boeing. It can happen in a lot of other manufacturers as well.
Captain Rai, I want to come back to you because just as you were explaining a very important technical point, we sort of lost you. So please tell me if I'm recapping you correctly. Basically, you have said that the Boeing manual actually says that there's a standard operating procedure if there's a dual engine flame out, and that is to cut off and run the fuel switches again so that the EEC can be reset, which basically in layperson's terms means that the engines can run again. There's an attempt to start the engines again. The 787 is a highly electrical aircraft, which is what I think a lot of people do not appreciate. And what you're actually saying is that if the pilots actually manage to cut off and then run the fuel switch again, which is how the photographs show that the fuel switches were on, the photos from the crash site, so that you are saying the pilots need to be appreciated for having that quickness of mind in the few seconds they had. Am I summarizing you correctly?
Absolutely correctly. And we do not know exactly what has happened. But if somebody is trying to speculate that the pilots had cut off the engine and tried to run it again, that is the standard operating procedure. I have flown all Boeing aeroplanes from 727 to 787 minus the 777. And all Boeings have similar procedure and it is followed to the T. I read out from the FCTM and it very clearly states that fuel control switches have to be cut off and run again. Now comes the second point. If they are trying to say that the pilots did that, try to corroborate this with the cockpit voice recorder. Because in the cockpit voice recorder, if a pilot is trying to switch off the fuel control switches, putting it to cut off, he calls out, left fuel control switch cut off. The other pilot acknowledges, check, and only then he cuts off that fuel control switch. Similarly for the right switch. So this conversation must have gone on in the cockpit if this procedure was followed. It's very easy to find out. Nobody can just turn around and say that, okay, he must have cut off the fuel control switch. Okay, listen to the cockpit voice recorder and see what has happened.
Can I ask you, Captain Rai, what you're saying
sitting
is...
and speculating that they made a mistake is absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
There are n number of ways to find out exactly what has happened. And this report, which has come out in the news, in the media, is misleading and trying to create a different kind of narrative, trying to point a finger at the pilots.
Yeah. Can I ask you what you're saying is, Captain Rai, is one, first I want to understand, we know that there were 32 seconds from takeoff to crash, but in real terms, for the pilots to make an intervention, it's 15 to 20 seconds. In 20 seconds, could the pilots have actually realized that both engines have flamed out, cut the fuel switches, run them again? What you're saying is if they did this, they actually need to be appreciated for showing their presence of mind in the few seconds that they had, and that this can be easily corroborated with the CVR, the cockpit voice recorder, and you will know, did this happen or did this not happen? Am I correct?
Absolutely right. In that much of time, whatever little time they had, if they have done this, hats off to them. I would appreciate their cool state of mind, their professionalism in handling the situation. Absolutely bang on.
The problem, Captain Thomas, is that instead of saying if they have done this, hats off to them, which is what Captain Rai just said, at least the parts that have come out into the public domain is like a whisper campaign against the pilots. It doesn't point a finger directly, but it actually implies कि गलती हुई, कि भाई ये switch off क्यों हुआ? And most people don't understand, as Captain Rai has just explained, as you have explained, that the switch is put off to run it again, to make an attempt to reset the engine, to start the electrical systems, the EEC again. Nobody is saying hats off in this leaked report. In this leaked report, instead, there is an insinuation of a pilot error, right? What is this doing to the morale of the pilot forums that you're in, to the association that you lead, Captain Thomas?
Absolute dejection, and we don't know how we can be played over and over again. So I will go one step ahead of Captain Rai and put my neck out and say that knowing Sumeet, he would have, if that was the emergency, he would have easily done it. He would have done it, and I can bet my ATPL on it. So there is no question that he would not have followed procedure. But that being what it is, it's appalling that we know what the game is being played and we continue to play along with it, and we fail to understand. In fact, we wrote a letter to the AAIB which came back undelivered saying CISF refused to accept that letter. So our question is, why the opaqueness? What is the so secretive about the accident has happened? People have lost lives. Now, what do you lose in? At least don't lose face in front of the aviation world where you cannot carry out a simple investigation in the proper manner. So all we are asking for is that, and as long as reputable media channels focus on that and keep them in check, if it is post your program that suddenly we decided that yes, we can decode a black box in India. Suddenly, till then it was damaged and it was burnt, it was tandoori, but no. So let's just keep it on that track. It will do a great help, and we would all thank you forever.
No, not at all. There's something so disturbing, Captain. I'm just coming to you. There's something so disturbing about people who are not alive. It's the easiest thing to do, right? Someone's gone. It's the easiest thing to do to point a finger at someone who's gone. But there's something even more problematic in these leaked reports, as Captain Rai has pointed out, that if indeed this happened, we as a country need to be saying hats off. We need to actually be saying hats off, because in the few seconds that Captain Sumeet and his co-pilot, Captain Clive, had, even as both engines possibly flamed out, they tried what the Boeing manual asks them to do, which is to cut off the fuel switches and run them again. There is no ambiguity that the fuel switches were found in the run mode. Captain Rai, are you disturbed that these leaked reports focus on the movement, so-called movement of the fuel switches, instead of on the loss of thrust, instead of on the failure possibly of the engines? Captain Rai.
I would like to elaborate on what Captain Sam Thomas had started in his introduction statement. We do not know what is the composition of the investigation board. I would like to know if there is a pilot, a member of the investigation board. That's a very important issue. If there is no pilot in the investigation board, these kind of things will happen because there is no representation from the pilot community. And an accident of this kind, all over the world, a pilot is always a part of the investigation board. So we need to find out, they need to answer if they have appointed a pilot as a member of the investigation board.
It's a really important question. And I want to end with you, Captain Thomas. Just to recap what we know so far. Leaked reports of a preliminary investigation into the Air India crash have been handed over to the government. Captain Thomas is the president of the Airline Pilots Association, is saying there's too much opacity. We simply do not know who the lead investigator is. Captain Rai, who's flown this plane, which has crashed, is saying, what is the composition of this? In the meantime, leaked media reports are focusing on whether the fuel switches were cut off and then run again, suggesting that this is possible pilot error. You have two experts here, including Captain Rai, who's flown this very plane, explaining to you that if indeed the fuel switches were cut off to run again, that is not a mistake. That is what the Boeing manual asks you to do if there is an engine flame out, as is widely believed to have taken place on board AI-171. So indeed, Captain Sumeet in command showed remarkable and extraordinary presence of mind for which he should be applauded, not smeared. I just want to put what we're talking about in context. I want to end with you, Captain Thomas. What is your biggest concern right now? And what do you mean you sent a letter that was not received? I want you to talk about that.
Firstly, all that you've summarized is perfectly correct. Secondly, we kept writing to our parent organization, ALPA, which sent a note to the DGCA, the Honorable Civil Aviation Minister, and the Civil Aviation Secretary. that, hey, look, we have guys here who know the job. Would you like to include them in your team? No response, not even an acknowledgement of the mail. So in true Indian old style, we sent it by registered post and speed post and all that, and came back saying that the CISF did not even accept that letter. So that's the kind of response that we got. All what we're saying is, let's stop the rhetoric, take a step back, include every subject matter expert. Let's be unified in the fact of finding what happened to this airplane. Thereafter, we can go around, instead of just pushing the narrative in a very opaque manner.
Yeah, I just want to say that this demand will have to come from the public. It's not going to come from anywhere else, because remember, it is we who fly as passengers on board these planes. No pilot is going to want to intentionally or carelessly take the risk to endanger his or her passengers, because he or she is also endangering themselves. So let us also remember that they also want to come home. And Captain Sumeet and Captain Clive, by the leaked reports, ironically, what's being suggested to have been a possible error, without saying so in so many words, is actually something that should be appreciated if it happened, because that training, that presence of mind to know that you're going down, but do everything that you can till the last few seconds that you have to try and save your passengers, your aircraft, and then yourself, in that order, was done, going by even these leaked reports. The opacity that has been called out is something to think about. And as I said, that call for transparency, especially when you're dealing with a corporate behemoth, not without controversy, like Boeing, what happened to their whistleblowers, how their testimony has gone before the US Congress and Senate is well documented. This call will have to come from us, from we the people. Thank you, Captain Rai, Captain Thomas. It is sad to hear that the pilots and the pilot community is dejected. Pilots need to feel confident again to fly aircraft, no matter which airline they're with, no matter where they are in the world. And so it's, the morale of the pilot community is also linked to safety and efficiency, and that's what we have to appreciate. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and we hope to reconnect with you as we know more, and we hope that we can pause our judgment till there is a transparent, verifiable, verified, publicly available document in place. And as both pilots have said, it is important to know who's leading the investigation, who's the lead investigator, are there enough subject matter experts, and so on. Thank you so much to both Captain Rai and Captain Thomas. Take care and see you soon. Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.